Bernie Sanders was put on the spot last night for daring to oppose the Vietnam War. Let's watch.
Secretary Webb, you served in Vietnam. You're a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. You served as a Marine in Vietnam. You're a decorated war hero. You eventually became Secretary of the Navy. During the Vietnam War, the man standing next to you, Senator Sanders, applied for status as a conscientious objector. Given his history, can he serve as a credible commander-in-chief?
Now, everybody makes their decisions, particularly when the time there is conscription. And as long as they go through the legal process that our country requires, I respect that. And it would be for the voters to decide, whether Senator Sanders or anyone else should be president. I will say this, coming from the position that I've come from a military family, with my brother a Marine, my son was a Marine in Iraq, I served as a Marine, spending 5 years in the Pentagon. I am very comfortable that I am the most qualified person standing up here today to be your commander-in-chief.
Senator Sanders, tell an American soldier who's watching right now tonight in Afghanistan why you can be commander-in-chief, given that you applied for conscientious objector status.
Let me applaud my good friend Jim Webb for his service to this country in so many ways. Jim and I, under Jim's leadership, as he indicated, passed the most significant veterans education bill in recent history. We followed suit with, a few years later, passing, under my leadership, the most significant veterans health care legislation in the modern history of this country. When I was a young man, I'm not a young man today. When I was a young man, I strongly opposed the war in Vietnam. Not the brave men like Jim who fought in that war, but the policy which got us involved in that war.
Look at the contrast between what the question was for Hillary about war and what it is for Bernie about war. So with Hillary, Dana Bash said, well, she said her vote on Iraq was a mistake. Why isn't that enough? And she directed that at the other people. Lincoln Chafee was the first one. And with Bernie, it's Bernie opposed the Vietnam War. Can he be president? Look at the bias. The bias is, even though she voted for the Iraq War, get over it. Why isn't it enough that she says now that she didn't want to vote for it? And with Bernie, he was on the right side. He was against Vietnam, and they're like, oh, he was against Vietnam. Can we trust this guy as president? What ridiculous framing. That's absurd. That's absurd. And understand, guys, if anything, that should be a reason to vote for him more. Because there was this, militaristic fervor in the country for a while at the beginning of Vietnam. And the reasons for Vietnam were absolutely bogus. It was complete and utter horseshit. I mean, a lot of the arguments they used, go back and look at what they said. The idea was this is part of a broader war between the Soviet Union and the U.S., and it's communism versus capitalism, and it's to save civilization that we're getting involved here. And utter nonsense. It was just utter nonsense. I mean, seriously, what do you think is going to happen? If we don't stop the spread of communism or some form of a communal society in fucking Vietnam, they're going to be in Nebraska next week? It wasn't going to happen. It was a fiction. It was a fantasy. And then we went there. Over 50,000 U.S. soldiers died, wasted lives. They should have never died. And millions of civilians died. It's unacceptable. I mean, this is one of those things where I think the rest of the world looks at America and they just roll their eyes. They're like, you're still debating whether or not Vietnam was a good thing? Everybody else looks at it as an out-and-out war crime. That you were vicious barbarians and savages in what you did. You dropped napalm and Agent Orange on innocent villagers. Women and children died as a result of what you did there. This isn't a debatable thing. I mean, everybody who was responsible for escalating the war should have been in jail. But this is what we do in America. You take things that are not debatable and you make them debatable, like Iraq. Oh, what do you mean? We invaded a country that didn't attack us. It was an illegal war. And then when we learned the reasons for the war were false, we stayed there for over a decade. That's not debatable. You're just wrong for doing the war, and you're war criminals. But this is what we do. And then a guy like Bernie, who was right to oppose it, they conflate that with, are you denigrating the troops? No, denigrating the troops is being in favor of the war. If you want our soldiers to die needlessly, you're denigrating the troops. You're the problem. I actually think we should only send our soldiers into harm's way when we absolutely have to for self-defense. The establishment thinks the opposite is true. So Bernie Sanders is right on this, and it's more of a reason to vote for him. The way they frame the question here shows obvious bias.